The snow had been falling since dawn, fine as sifted flour, coating the high plains in white silence. The world looked like it had been reborn, pure, untouched, and endless. Along a narrow trail that wound through the aspen trees, a lone woman trudged forward, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, her boots sinking deep into the powder. Her name was Clara Ellison, a schoolteacher from the East who had come west to forget. Forget a man who had broken his promise. Forget the laughter of a town that called her too quiet, too simple, too trusting. Now she was alone in a country that knew no mercy. The blizzard had caught her before she reached the settlement she'd been told would take her in. Her horse had collapsed miles back. For the last 3 hours she had walked through the white void, her fingers numb, her breath raw in her throat. When she stumbled, she fell into the snow and stayed there, her lashes heavy with frost. The cold whispered of sleep. She thought of her mother's voice back in Boston, of the church bells, of soft hands sewing beside the fire. A warmth spread through her chest, a dangerous warmth, the kind that came before death. She almost didn't hear the sound of hooves until they stopped a few paces away. A shadow loomed over her. Then a man's voice, deep and accented, spoke something in a language she did not know. She opened her eyes and saw him, a tall figure astride a bay horse wrapped in a buffalo hide cloak, his hair black and long, his face sharp with the high-boned grace of the Apache. His dark eyes regarded her with quiet intensity, not suspicion, not cruelty, but something older, measured, grounded, like the earth itself. He dismounted and knelt beside her, brushing the snow from her cheek with a leather-gloved hand. "You live," he said in careful English. "I think so," she whispered, her lips trembling. He nodded once. "You are far from your fire." "I was headed to Fort Arlen. My horse?" She fell, his gaze lifted to the horizon. "Fort Arlen is 2 suns away. You would not reach it." He looked back at her, then without another word lifted her as if she weighed no more than a child. She gasped at the sudden strength in him, but she was too weak to resist. The scent of smoke and pine clung to him. His heartbeat was steady against her shoulder. He placed her on his horse, mounted behind her, and urged the animal forward. The world blurred around her as the cold retreated under the warmth of his body. The rhythm of the horse lulled her into something close to safety. The last thing she saw before her eyes closed was the fall of his hair against the fur collar of his cloak, black against white like night protecting day. When she woke, it was to firelight and the scent of meat cooking. She was wrapped in a heavy hide, lying on a bed of furs inside a small lodge. The fire cast shadows that danced along the curved walls of buffalo skin. The man sat near the flames, sharpening a knife against a stone. His profile was calm, focused, his features cut by the fire's gold. She watched him for a long time before he spoke without turning. "You wake," he said simply. "Yes," she murmured, her throat dry. "You saved me. I found you. That's the same, isn't it?" Now he looked at her. "No, I only carried you from the snow. You must choose to live." Something in the way he said it stirred her. She tried to sit up, and he rose immediately, crossing to her. "Slow," he warned, his voice softening. He handed her a bowl of steaming broth. She took it, her fingers brushing his, feeling the warmth. "I don't know your name," she said between sips. "Taza," he replied, "son of Nantan. My people camp 2 valleys east, but I stay here alone for the winter." "Why?" His eyes drifted toward the storm outside. Sometimes a man must listen to his ghosts. She didn't know what to say to that. The wind howled against the hide walls. The world outside was a white wilderness, but inside the lodge the fire made a small circle of light, a world of its own. He moved with quiet grace, tending the flames, checking her bandaged feet. Each motion was careful, almost reverent, as if he understood how close she had come to never breathing again. Days passed. The storm raged, and she stayed, recovering strength. She learned he spoke little but listened deeply. He asked about her world, her teaching, her reasons for wandering into a land that swallowed the unprepared. She found herself telling him things she had never told another soul. That she had been engaged once, that the man she loved had left her for her sister, that she had left everything behind because the pain had made the world too small. When she finished, Taza said nothing for a long time. Then with quiet conviction he said, "You think your heart has died? It has not, it waits, like the earth under snow." She looked at him, startled by the simple truth of it. His words carried weight, not like the hollow comforts of priests or gentlemen, but like a promise born from endurance. That night she lay awake listening to the wind, feeling something thaw inside her that had been frozen for too long. The days settled into a rhythm, quiet and steady like the beat of a drum in the distance. Each morning, Taza would step out before dawn to check his snares or hunt, his figure disappearing into the pale light beyond the trees. When he returned, Clara would already have the fire going, her hair unbound, her cheeks pink with the warmth inside the lodge. They didn't speak much. Words seemed unnecessary in the hush of snow, but the silence between them grew gentle, not awkward. Sometimes he would bring back a rabbit or a brace of birds, and she would help clean them, her delicate fingers learning the movements of survival under his watchful eyes. He showed her how to twist willow bark into rope, how to pack snow into ice walls to block the wind, how to listen for the sound of wolves before they came too close. She had never known a man who moved with such quiet certainty, who needed no boasting, no swagger. In him there was a steadiness that calmed her. The first time she laughed, a real, startled laugh, was when she tried to light the fire with flint and sent a spark onto her sleeve. He had smirked, a rare and fleeting thing, and said, "You fight the fire like it is a wild horse." "And you? You think you can tame both?" she teased, and he raised an eyebrow as if surprised she had a spark of her own. "Fire obeys only the one who respects it," he said, and there was something in his tone that made her blush, as if he were speaking of more than flame. That night the storm grew fierce again. The wind clawed at the hides, the fire hissed, and snow seeped through the seams like ghostly breath. Clara drew closer to the fire, wrapping the fur around her shoulders. Taza watched her from where he sat, sharpening his knife again. Finally, she asked, "Do you ever go back to your people?" "Sometimes," he said. "But this winter, no. Why?" He looked into the fire, the blade of his knife glinting orange. "My father was chief. He believed the old ways were dying. My brother went to war. I went away to learn peace. They call me the ghost of two worlds. Not one, not the other." She wanted to say something to comfort him, but she understood. She too was between worlds, born of gentility, now sleeping on the earth. Their loneliness, she realized, was not so different. He stood suddenly and went to the doorway. Snow still fell thick, erasing the tracks he had made earlier. "Come," he said softly, holding out his hand. "You must see something." She hesitated but took it. His hand was warm, strong, calloused, the kind of hand that had held both weapons and wounded things. He led her outside into the vast glowing night. The snow stopped falling, and above them, the stars spread like spilled diamonds across the black sky. The moon hung low, heavy and golden, turning the snowfields into rivers of light. Clara gasped softly. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is alive," he said. "The white ground breathes. The stars see us. When you are alone long enough, you hear them speak." "What do they say?" she asked, smiling a little. He turned to her, and for the first time she saw the firelight reflected in his eyes. "They say the world remembers every step, every kindness, every truth. Nothing is lost." Something inside her trembled. "Then maybe they will remember you," she said. He looked at her for a long time, his breath visible in the moonlight. "And you?" She hesitated. "Maybe they will remember that I was lost, and someone found me." He didn't speak, but in the silence that followed, something passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. The snow gleamed around them like a blessing, the cold forgotten. Over the next weeks, the boundary between them thinned. She caught herself watching him when he worked, the easy roll of muscle under his buckskin shirt, the quiet patience in his movements. He would glance at her sometimes as if aware of her gaze but never shaming her for it. One evening, as she mended a tear in his cloak, her hand brushed his wrist. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then with deliberate gentleness he turned his hand and let his fingers rest against hers. "You are not afraid of me," he said quietly. "I was," she admitted, "but not anymore." He tilted his head slightly. "Why not?" "Because you look at me like I belong somewhere." He drew a slow breath, his gaze softening. "You belong to the wind now," he murmured. "It carries your sorrow away." That night she dreamed of her old home, but when she woke she no longer felt the ache of it. Instead, she felt the pulse of the fire beside her, the faint scent of smoke, and the nearness of the man who had saved her life. The loneliness that had once haunted her began to fade, replaced by something fragile and bright, hope. One evening, when the snow melted just enough to reveal patches of earth, Clara sat outside the lodge, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Taza joined her, carrying a carved wooden bowl. He handed it to her. Inside, nestled in a bit of fur, was a small bird, injured, trembling, but alive. It hit the tree, he said, but it breathes still. She cupped it gently in her hands, her fingers trembling. Poor thing, he watched her. You know how to heal it? I can try, she said softly. Sometimes all something broken needs is warmth. Their eyes met, and in that look words became unnecessary. They both knew she wasn't speaking only of the bird. As night fell, she set the small creature near the fire, nursing it through the dark. Taza sat beside her, silent but near. When the bird fluttered weakly in the morning light and finally stood on its own, she smiled and found him smiling too. And though neither said it aloud, they both felt something new had been born between them, fragile as that bird, but alive. Winter deepened again before it began to ease. The snow outside grew softer, the light shifting from gray to gold, and each morning the air smelled faintly of thawing pine. Clara had stopped counting the days. The world beyond Taza's valley had become a dream, one she no longer wished to wake from. Her hands had grown rougher, her shoulders stronger. She no longer felt like a lost teacher from the east, but like a woman reborn in the silence of the wild. Yet there was one thing she could not quiet, the ache that grew in her whenever she looked at Taza too long. It wasn't only gratitude. It was something deeper, something she barely dared name. He treated her with quiet respect, always keeping a certain distance between them, though his every act of care, sharing food, tending her fire, even the way he looked at her when she spoke of feeling. But he never crossed that line, and she didn't know if it was because he didn't want to, or because he wanted too much. One evening, the wind stilled completely. The valley lay in silence, the snow reflecting the sunset in pink and amber hues. Clara was gathering dry twigs near the lodge when she saw Taza standing a little way off, looking toward the mountains. The wind lifted his hair, and for a moment he looked carved from the same earth and sky, strong, untamed, eternal. She approached quietly. "You're far away," she said softly. He didn't turn. "I listen," he said. "The mountain speaks tonight, and what does it say? That the snow will end soon, and the time of choice will come." She hesitated. "Choice?" He turned then, his gaze finding hers with a gentleness that both calmed and frightened her. "You must go back to your people when the trail opens. The fort, the town." Her chest tightened. "And you?" "I will not go where I am not wanted." "Then I'll stay," she blurted, surprising herself. He looked at her as if he had expected those words but wished he hadn't. "You do not understand. To live among my people, you must walk their path. You would be alone." "I've been alone all my life," she said, her voice trembling. "Except here." The silence between them stretched. His breath came out in a mist. "Clara," he said softly, "your heart speaks without fear, but you do not know what it asks." She took a step closer. "Then tell me. Teach me what I ask." He stared at her, his jaw tightening. "Why do you say this?" "Because," she whispered, "I don't want to go back. I don't want the noise, the gossip, the cold rooms where people pretend to be kind. Here I am seen. Here I am not a mistake." Her voice broke. "You saved my life, Taza. But more than that, you made me remember who I am." He stood very still. The last light of day fell across his face, outlining the planes of it, the sharp cheekbones, the strong line of his mouth, the flicker of emotion he couldn't hide. "You should not say such things," he murmured. "You speak like a woman who loves." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Maybe I do." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Taza turned sharply away, his hand clenching at his side. "You do not know what love means to my people," he said, his voice low. "It is not a thing of pretty words or promises. It is sacred. It binds not just two hearts, but two souls for all their lives. I'm not afraid of sacred things," she whispered. He turned back to her, and something in his restraint broke. "You should be," he said, "because they change you forever." "I'm already changed." Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the dusk like the first cry of spring. He looked at her, and what he saw there, truth, courage, tenderness, stilled him completely. For a long moment, the world around them seemed to vanish. Then he said softly, "There is something you hide from me still." She drew a shaky breath. "I've never been with a man," she confessed. "Not even the one I was to marry. I thought love meant obedience. I was wrong. It was only loneliness wearing a ring. His eyes darkened and his breath caught almost imperceptibly. He stepped closer, his voice lowering to a near whisper. You speak your truth without shame. I have none left to hide, she said, her gaze steady. If I'm to belong anywhere, I want it to be here. With you. For the first time since she had met him, Taza's control wavered. He reached out and touched her face, his thumb brushing the corner of her mouth. The gesture was tender, reverent, almost fearful. Clara, he murmured, do you understand what you say? Among my people, when a woman gives her heart, it is not taken lightly. The night becomes sacred. The spirits listen. I understand, she breathed. He looked at her for a long time, the firelight from the lodge flickering over his features. Then he smiled, a slow, faint smile that carried both wonder and gravity. Then tonight, he said quietly, will be sacred. The words sank into her like warmth after endless winter. He didn't reach for her. He didn't need to. The space between them filled with a kind of stillness she had never known, something older than desire, gentler than fear. She felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, but from the enormity of the moment. That night they did not speak much. Inside the lodge, the fire burned low, and the wind outside carried soft flakes of new snow. When he took her hand, it was with reverence. When he looked into her eyes, it was as if he saw every part of her she had hidden away. Their closeness was not born of hunger, but of understanding. A joining of two souls that had wandered the cold for too long and finally found warmth. When the fire dimmed and only embers glowed, she whispered, I was afraid no one would ever see me again. He touched his forehead to hers and said, now the spirits see us both. And in that quiet, beneath the song of wind and the sighing trees, Clara realized she had never been more alive. When dawn came, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world so still it felt like creation's first morning. The air smelled of pine and thawing earth. The snow dripped from the lodge's eaves in slow, steady tears. Clara woke to light spilling across the firs, the fire low, her head resting against Taza's chest. For a long moment she simply listened to his heartbeat, slow and steady beneath her ear, a rhythm older than any hymn she'd ever known. She rose quietly, wrapped herself in her shawl and stepped outside. The valley shimmered. Ice clung to the branches like glass, and the river that had been frozen all winter now whispered beneath a thin crust. For the first time in months she heard birds. Life was returning. But with it came a faint ache of dread. The thaw would open the trail again. The world beyond would remember her name, her absence, her unfinished past. When Taza emerged, carrying water from the stream, she turned to him. Spring is here, she said softly. He nodded. Yes, soon you will be able to go. The words, though gentle, struck deep. You still think I should? It is not what I want, he admitted. But the world does not make peace easily with hearts that cross its lines. She frowned. Lines are made by men. I don't care for them, he smiled faintly. And yet they care for you. She turned away, frustration tightening her throat. I thought last night meant something sacred. It did, he said at once, stepping closer. It means everything. But the sacred does not protect us from the world, it tests us. His words lingered, heavy and true. For days afterward, the peace between them held, but underneath it ran an unspoken tension. Taza began to hunt farther from camp. Clara busied herself tending the lodge, mending clothes, drying herbs he'd gathered. But when she looked toward the horizon, she saw the smoke of distant riders. The army patrols had returned with spring. It happened 3 days later. She was gathering wood when the sound of hooves thundered through the valley. A small group of blue-coated soldiers appeared, their rifles gleaming. The man at their head, a tall captain with a gray mustache, halted when he saw her. Miss Ellison? He called. By God, we thought you were dead. Her stomach dropped. Captain Reed. She had met him once before when she'd first passed through the territory. He dismounted, staring at her in disbelief. You vanished in the storm. We found your horse frozen near the ridge. We searched for days. His gaze shifted past her to the lodge. You've been here all winter? Before she could answer, Taza emerged from the trees, bow slung over his shoulder. Instantly, every rifle lifted. Hold your fire, Clara cried, running forward. He's the one who saved me. The captain's face hardened. That's an Apache. He's a man, she said fiercely. A man who gave me life when the cold would have taken it. Taza stopped a few paces away, his expression unreadable. He said something in his language, low and calm. Clara stepped between him and the soldiers. He means no harm, she pleaded. Please. Captain Reed's voice softened slightly, but his eyes stayed wary. Miss Ellison, whatever this is, whatever you've been through, you're safe now. We'll take you back to Fort Arlen. You can tell your story there. I'm not leaving him, she said. The soldiers exchanged glances. One muttered under his breath, Savages got her bewitched. Taza's eyes flashed, but he did not move. He looked only at her. Clara, he said quietly, you must go. They will not understand. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. Not after everything. Not after, go, he said again more firmly. His gaze held hers, and she saw the pain behind it. The desperate calm of a man who had learned long ago that love often demanded sacrifice. If you stay, they will hurt you to reach me. I don't care. But he reached out and touched her cheek once, gently, reverently. I do. Then he turned and walked into the trees. Stop him. A soldier shouted, but Clara threw herself in their path. No, let him go. The captain raised a hand, hesitating. Hold fire, he ordered reluctantly. He's not worth the blood. Taza vanished into the pines, silent as wind. That night, back at the fort, Clara sat by the window of a borrowed room, staring out at the dark. The lamplight flickered, her heart torn between two worlds. They had called her brave, lucky, even miraculous. None of it mattered. Without him, the world felt small again. Days passed. She walked among the fort's people like a ghost. She taught the children their letters, tended to the sick, smiled when spoken to. But every time she looked toward the mountains, she felt a pull, strong, constant, alive. She dreamed of him often, the way he looked when he smiled, the sound of his voice saying her name, the warmth in his eyes when he said, "Then tonight will be sacred." Spring became summer. The valley would be green now, she thought. The river full, the sky wide. One evening, as the sun bled over the plains, she packed a small satchel and left. The trail was rough, but she knew it by heart. When she reached the ridge where he had first found her, the air was warm, filled with birdsong. She stood there a long while, her heart thundering. Then she heard it, the soft tread of hooves. He appeared through the trees, astride the same bay horse, older cloak on his shoulders, his face shadowed by the sunset. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then she ran to him. He caught her in his arms before she could speak. She felt his breath against her hair, heard his heart pounding as wildly as hers. I thought you would not come back, he murmured. I tried not to, she said, laughing through her tears. But the world was too quiet without you. He pulled back enough to look at her, his smile slow, disbelieving. You chose the harder path. I chose the truer one, she whispered. He brushed her cheek with his fingers as if to make sure she was real. Then the spirits are kind, he said softly. They brought you home. The summer air was sweet with sage and wild lavender. A silver river wound through the valley, glittering under the dawn, and the mountains stood watch, blue and still. Clara rode behind Taza on the narrow trail, her hands resting lightly against his waist. It felt unreal to her that she was here again, alive, free, and with him. Every hoofbeat sounded like a heartbeat echoing through the land. They reached the high meadow where his lodge once stood. The snow was gone, but the circle of stones remained, marking the fire that had warmed them through the longest winter. Clara dismounted slowly, her skirts brushing the grass, and looked around with a smile that trembled. It's smaller than I remembered, she said softly. Taza tied the reins and stepped beside her. The world was bigger then, he said. We were fighting the cold. And we won, she whispered. He looked at her, his expression quiet but full of warmth. No, the spirits gave mercy. We only listened. Together they rebuilt the lodge, not as it had been, but anew. Clara gathered branches while Taza cut poles, his movements measured, his body strong under the summer sun. When they set the final hide in place, she stood back and laughed. It's crooked, she said. He studied it a moment, then smiled faintly. It will stand. So will we. That night they lit the first fire. Sparks rose into the dark, drifting toward the stars like prayers. Clara sat close to him, the light painting gold across his face. When I was at the fort, she said quietly, I used to look at the mountains and think they were watching me. I wondered if you were up there doing the same. I was, he said simply. Every night I watched the smoke from the fort and thought, if the wind carried my breath, would you feel it? Her throat tightened. I did. I just didn't know what it was. For a while they sat in silence, the fire snapping softly, the air rich with pine. Then Taza reached into his pouch and drew out something small, a thin band of braided hide threaded with a single white bead. He placed it in her hand. "This is my mother's," he said. "She wore it the day she became one with my father. When she died, she said it should be given only once more." Clara stared at it, her fingers trembling. "You're sure?" He nodded. "It is the bond of our people. When two hearts speak truth, the night becomes sacred again." She blinked back tears. "It already is." He tied the braid gently around her wrist, the bead glinting like a drop of moonlight. Then he pressed his forehead to hers. "Now the spirits see us," he murmured. The world seemed to hush around them, the wind, the fire, even the whispering trees. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of him, the peace she had never known in all her life. For the first time, she didn't feel lost or in between. She felt home. Days turned into weeks. The meadow bloomed with wildflowers and the river ran clear. Clara learned to weave baskets to dry meat, to track the deer that passed near their camp. Taza built a small corral for the horse, and sometimes at dusk they would ride along the ridge, the sky painted in crimson and gold. He taught her words in his language, Ashki for boy, Ta for three, Shizee for father, and she laughed as she tried to shape them on her tongue. One morning, when the light was pale and the world still, Taza came to her with quiet eyes. "You will have to return once more," he said, "to tell them you live so they will not search or send soldiers." She nodded. "Will you come with me?" "Yes," he said simply. "A man does not let the wind carry his heart away alone." They rode down to the fort together. The townsfolk stared, whispering, but Clara held her head high. Captain Reed met them at the gate, eyes wide but respectful. "Miss Ellison," he said, "we feared the worst." "I found better," she replied, glancing at Taza. The captain studied them both, then sighed. "I suppose some stories don't belong in reports." He tipped his hat. "Go in peace." That night, as they rode back toward the mountains, Taza said softly, "The world has eyes, but not always a heart. You met them with both, and you taught me how," she answered. When they reached the valley again, dusk had fallen. Fireflies drifted above the grass like wandering stars. Clara stopped and turned in the saddle to look at him. "Do you ever think," she said, "about that first night? When you found me in the snow?" He smiled, the expression slow and sure. "Every day. It was the night the world began again." She reached for his hand. "Then tonight is its echo." They sat there for a long time, the wind soft against their faces, the sky deep and full of promise. The fireflies glowed brighter, and somewhere far off an owl called, a low, solemn sound that felt like a blessing. Later, lying beside the fire, Clara rested her head on Taza's shoulder. The moonlight spilled across them both, gentle and whole. "You once said love binds two souls for all their lives," she whispered. "And after?" He smiled, his voice barely more than breath. "After, the spirits keep their fire burning among the stars. One day, we will be that fire for others lost in the snow." Her eyes filled with tears, but they were the good kind, the kind that come when the heart is too full. She took his hand, their fingers weaving together like the threads of her bracelet. Outside, the wind carried the scent of summer grass through the open flap of the lodge. The same land that had once nearly claimed her now held her gently, and as the flames rose and the night deepened, she felt the truth settle over her like a warm blanket. Love had not just saved her, it had remade her. When dawn came, gold spilled over the mountains, washing the valley in light. The river sang, the earth breathed, and the two who had once been lost stood together, whole. And for as long as the stars remembered the song of winter and fire, their names, Taza and Clara, would be carried on the wind, whispered softly in the sacred silence of the plains. The end